Hello, everyone. My name is Anne Faubry, and I'm going to talk to you today about how to eco-design a B2B app. So to present myself, I have a double hat. I work as a freelance UX UI designer, mainly for public services. So this is why I'm going to choose this kind of examples today for illustrating how to design a B2B app in an environmental friendly manner. And I also work as a researcher and trainer in the association Designer Ethiques, which means ethical designers in English. And so I run the eco-design research program with Aurélie Baton. I create resources under a license Creative Commons. And I also contribute to different national and international standards for eco-design. I hear a lot in my trainings things like, I can't do much in eco-design because in my products, there is no images or videos since it's a software as an application, for example. I also hear that Green IT is mainly something in the backend. So we do optimize our requests and architecture, but we're not really concerned in the design team. So if you too heard about eco-design, but do not see what you can do regarding your product, you are in the right place. Because there is a lot of good practices that we can implement in a B2B app or SaaS. For example, we can implement best practices regarding product strategy, user research, the improvement of user journeys, the selection of components, and the collaboration with tech and business. So this is the kind of best practices we're going to look at today. Before we dive into the topic, you will see that on my slides, I refer a lot to a French standard called RGESN. So to present it to you, it means it's an acronym, which means in French, le référentiel général d'éco-conception des services numériques. But it actually stands for General Policy Framework for the Eco-Design of Digital Services. So this is a standard which was published in May 2024 in France, and it was planned in the French law called the REN for reduction of the environmental footprint of the digital services. It's made out of 78 criteria to assess the eco-design approach of the service. So it's not guidelines on how to do it. It's more a way of assessing how responsible your approach is regarding eco-design. What's good about it is that it's divided by the topics and also the priority levels and difficulty. So the 3 priority levels I'm going to display on my slides as well. This standard is not compulsory in France, even though it's more and more used. And for our international audience, you will see on the slide, I also refer to a second framework called the Web Sustainability Guidelines. I will show you the link at the end of this presentation. But it's an international standard made by the W3C, to which I also contributed. And so it's another standard you can refer to if you want to promote some of the best practices. And for each of the best practice, I'm going to show you a real-life example for different projects I worked on. These examples come from something called beta.gouv. Beta.gouv is an incubator program we have for French public services. It's made out of 22 incubators, one for each French ministry. So far, it has created more than 200 services during about 8 years. And it gathers a community of more than 1,000 freelance workers, developers, designers, product owners, etc., who work with a public servant on a specific need and digital service. So what's good about it is that we can easily apply an agile methodology to public service. It means we can stop very early the service if it doesn't add any value, and also that we can develop very quickly the service. And once it's at scale, then it's integrated in the IT system of the ministry. So it's a much faster and efficient way of creating public services. I worked, and I'm going to show you examples from 3 different projects. One is called Cartobio. It's a certifying tool for organic agriculture. The second one is called Dialogue. It's a digitization service for traffic regulation that mainly my colleague Aurélie Baton worked on. And the final one is called Audio Description, which is a catalog of audio described movies. So three very different topics. And now let's dive into the real subject of this talk. How can we eco-design a B2B application? First, the strategy of the product. Something which is extremely important is first to assess if the service is actually needed and useful. In many cases, we tend to see digital services as an easy way to solve a problem, but sometimes digitizing stuff is not the best way to tackle an issue. So it can be difficult to say no to the creation of a new service, especially if it's an ongoing project. But sometimes as a freelancer, I can say no, or I can recommend not to do it. And sometimes it works. So it's still important to mention. Otherwise, it's also something we can do in the early stages of the product to see if there might be some negative externalities to the product that we could mitigate. It's something we did last week on the project Audio Description, hence this picture. We did this workshop when we imagine what a utopian result could look like for our project in maybe 3 or 5 years. And then we thought, what would be the externalities, positive and negative? And so we described what a dystopian evolution of our project could be, the worst thing which might happen. And then we identified solutions. It could be features. It could be also safeguards for our team to implement to prevent these negative externalities or to contribute to these positive externalities. So the results were 50 potential externalities that we gathered in our Notion, as you can tell. So for example, for each of them, we could classify them. It's linked to our jobs to be done, which constitute our roadmap. And we also could link the features with externalities. So for example, regarding the rebound effect that we might have on the consumption of streaming, because it's a platform to find easily movies for blind people, we could see that it might increase the streaming consumption. And so that's why we thought that as a solution, maybe we could recommend to partnering platforms to remove the video when only the audio is required. Because if I'm blind, I don't necessarily need the video. So that's something we identified thanks to this workshop. So don't hesitate to do this. It's very easy. It's a 2-hour-long workshop with the whole team. It's very interesting to share the same vision and to share our different concerns, whether it's about cybersecurity, AI, environment, social inclusion, and to see what we could do in the early stages regarding indicators, safeguards, or features to avoid that. Second is the user research. So obviously, as designers, we tend to define the user's needs. But it's actually something which is also very useful to identify how far we should go in the development of the service. So here, for example, in Cartobio, we wanted to know if the agricultures were going to need our service for the organic honey, because we focused at the beginning a lot on the main topic, which was the crops and the fields. But then we thought about vegetables and about honey and fruit trees. And we were thinking, do they need us to do organic agriculture? And so the answer was no, thanks to the inquiry that the UX designer Juliette Palombo conducted. We identified that the honey makers did not need new features or specific features on the tool for themselves. And so that it was something which didn't need to be done. That's very important, not to oversize and increase the dimensions of the service if it's not required. We should also, in the user research, include users with low digital literacy and low bandwidth and old devices. So it's very important to make sure that the service is going to answer their needs, not to increase their exclusion. It's something we do on the audio description project. You can see my user tests chart here. And so for each profile, I write how comfortable they are with digital tools, but also their age, their region, their gender, to make sure I have diversity among themselves. Some of them don't have French as the native spoken language. So it's also important to make sure that these people can also use the tool. And if they can do it, everybody can do it. That's the best part of it. And it's also something which can be included in the personas, the low digital literacy, but also you can add what device they use and what is the bandwidth. So then later you can think about your personas, and it's a safeguard during the whole project to make sure that this persona is also able to use the service. In the early stages, it's also a good opportunity when we talk to the users to identify how long they're going to need to access the files, the contents. So we can define an archiving and deletion strategy for obsolete and outdated content, which is consistent to their needs. So even if it's a technical topic, eventually the need is in the user's hand. So for example, here on Gartebio, we thought that a draft, which was older than 2 years, which hadn't been opened in a year, for a farm which has been certified on a different file, maybe wasn't needed and could be deleted without the user's consent. So it's this kind of rules that we can set for automatic deletion, or we can also warn the user that maybe a draft will be deleted after a year if it's not opened. Then let's get into the improvement of the main user journeys. So that's when you have an existing product. At the beginning, it's an MVP, minimum viable product. It's kind of small. And then we add features all the time. And eventually, sometimes it makes the experience much more difficult, especially for new users who didn't see the whole evolution. So it's important to make it basic at the beginning. So here we had some cheap filters. And then we added more and more filters depending on the needs of the user. And eventually, as you can tell, we have 8 of them sometimes in the extreme case, which might happen. So we thought maybe we need to remerge this whole feature of filters into something much more practical. So when we add a new feature, sometimes it's nice to just step back a little bit and think maybe it's an opportunity to actually improve the experience for everyone so that they spend less time on the tool and eventually it decreases their environmental footprint. It also means to keep things simple. So it can mean by merging, of course, the features, but it can also mean by not displaying the whole information in one place on one page, especially if you have forms. So here it's a form to enter traffic regulation. So it can be directly transferred to via an API to GPS solutions. And here it was a button to define an exception. So what Aurélie Baton did here is hide some of the contents behind a click action, so anybody doesn't see these unnecessary fields. We should also remove non-essential features. So that's also when we do continuous improvement. Sometimes we might go too far, and it's nice. That's why otherwise we wouldn't have made them and prototyped them. But maybe it's not necessary. Here we wanted to add a chart to see very visually how organic the farm was. So you have a few years of transition before becoming organic. And here we can see how much is not organic and what year is which percentage of the farm organic or not. And it was nice, but it made the chart quite complicated. It was harder on a small screen to see. It was hard to make the chart accessible, so it needed quite a lot of development time. So that's why eventually in the development of this page, we didn't include this feature. We thought if it's really necessary, maybe they're going to ask for it more. It's ready in the prototype and user interface if needed, but it's not developed because we thought it was maybe too much regarding the cost of development and other performance criteria. When we add new features, it's important to make them the simplest way possible. So here the topic was that the auditors for certifying organic fields needed to find easily among the thousands of farms their company was responsible for, the ones that I specifically needed to take care about. And so first our thought was to add the name of the auditor in the line, like a Google Drive, for example, so we could see who was responsible for which farm. And then we could find ours and maybe filter by mine if I'm connected, etc. And then we thought maybe the simplest way, we don't really care if this guy or that woman has this or that farm. So maybe the best way is just to propose favorites. It's a one-click button with the little star, and I can filter with my favorites automatically. Anyway, they're going to be at the top in the display of this chart. And so it makes it's a very simple way to answer the basic need, which was I need to find the audits I'm currently working on. And so then it's just left to the user to add to favorites or not. And there's not this ownership of people to manage, which is complicated also if they leave the company, etc. So we tried to answer the need with the simplest feature possible. Then we get into UI. When we decided what the features should be like, it's important to choose the right components to do it. So for example, here we needed to export sometimes all the different forms my company takes care about. And it can take like at least 10 seconds to export those thousands of forms. And so what's important is that you have interface feedback to make sure people don't send the request over and over again because they're not sure that if it has been taken into account. And here we should be very cautious about people with low bandwidth, because sometimes if I test it with my very high-speed connection, it's going to be fine. It's going to take 2 seconds. And I'm like, this is okay. We don't need any background processing information. But maybe it's not going to be the case for the auditor who's on the farm and who needs to download in the countryside those files. So always think about your personas. Remember the person with the low bandwidth, and make sure that these persons are also going to get the right feedback in their contexts. So background processing buttons is very important in this kind of situation. Also, there's not many things which are actually forbidden in eco-design. I tend to say there's only 2 which are really forbidden in all contexts. I think it's infinite scroll and autoplay for videos and audios. It's the 2 things which I've never seen as being legitimate in any context. So infinite scroll has many issues regarding attention of the users and dark patterns, regarding performance, regarding accessibility, and regarding eco-design. So, of course, it should be pagination. Choose the right amount to display. Sometimes I see websites where the amount displayed is far too long. So don't put it too long. Don't put it too short either. It's very annoying for people to have to visit several pages to find what they're looking for, especially if they are blind, for example, and they are navigating by the ear and the keyboard. So don't make it too short. Don't make it too long. Test with your users, but do add pages. Anytime there is a form, we should make it very explicit, the input format which is expected, so that people don't send failures. The goal is always to make things smoother and to avoid unnecessary impact. So here, if I don't have the input format, I'm going to send mistake, and then it's going to be requests which were not necessary and going to be impactful for the environment for nothing. So to make it efficient, add information above the field, because if I type in the field, I don't have the information anymore, so it's not accessible. So put the information outside of the field, make your error message very explicit and specific and not generic. And also, if it's to upload a file, you can specify the format of the file which can be taken. If there is a download of a file, you should always inform the user of the format and the size of the file before he or she downloads it, because otherwise it can be very long. If I don't have Wi-Fi, it can be a lot of data that's going to be used, which can be impactful for my money as a user if I don't have unlimited data, which can be really slow, or which can impact the environment more, because if you are roaming, data is far more impactful for the environment than Wi-Fi, 20 times more in France, about 20 times more. It depends on the country. So indicate the maximum weight. If it's an export document and you don't know the weight in advance, you can just put an average of the weight so that the user can assess how heavy it's going to be. What's also extremely important, a top priority best practice in eco-design is to be responsive. Because as we said regarding the persona, the users need to be able to access to the service, even if they have an old smartphone with a narrow screen and low bandwidth, because that's where most of the environmental footprint of the digital services lie. It's really in the devices of the user. That's 80%, about 80% of the footprint. So what we really are trying to aim at with eco-design is to make sure that the user doesn't need to change his or her device because our website or service is too slow on his or hers. So making it responsive makes also sure that it's more accessible, because if I zoom in, then it's not going to overlap with the text. It's fully responsive. With this product, it was quite difficult, as you can imagine, because we have a map and a chart. So making it okay on a 320 pixels smartphone size, which is the width recommended for all the smartphones or iPhone SE, is quite challenging, but we managed. So if we manage, you can too. And finally, the last topic I wanted to tackle was how to collaborate with other jobs like tech and business. So first, as designers, we tend to work a lot with the product team and the developers on the product. So when we do interfaces, it's best to show them to the developers and discuss them with them, because they might have very interesting feedback. And at that stage, and even earlier if we can, it's nice to just pause for a few minutes to ponder, is our feature going to have a rebound effect? Is it going to affect some people? Is it going to affect the environment? How? Almost like we did as the first best practice to assess the externalities, we can do that for every feature. It doesn't take long, just a few minutes. Sometimes it's like, I don't have anything to say, but sometimes you're going to think, maybe this is going to exclude some users. Maybe we can think of a way around this problem. So that's really something we included in every description of our new features to make sure that it's not forgotten. When we work with developers, we also need to do interactions and to design them with them. So for example, it's important to, if we have auto-completion, like for the streets and an address, to clearly describe the length of the debounce. It should be 500 milliseconds. And also to not send any requests for auto-completion before the user has typed at least 3 characters. Another thing which, as designers, we should stress on if we work with developers who are not necessarily aware of eco-design best practices is support their choices regarding standard interoperable technologies, such as open source technologies. They are best because they are more robust, but also because they're going to avoid people from reinventing the wheel each in their own corner. And they're going to be easier to maintain over time, because even if the proprietary technology is going to be not profitable anymore, it's not going to be blocked. people can have access to make their own adaptations to their needs. So it's really best to use this kind of technologies. A very basic implication of that is that it's best to prefer progressive web apps over native apps. Native apps tend to be 10 times bigger than PWA. Then PWA is also good for SEO, and it avoids having a native app for iOS and one for Android. It avoids all the updates, which can be a lot of data transfer. So it's really best to use as much web technologies as possible and to reduce the use of technologies which are private. And you can test. It's really important, even if it's not always in the job of the designer. You can do it too. It's easy. You can do it in your browser to pretend to be a smartphone, a 320 pixel wide smartphone. And you can also simulate a low bandwidth with your browser in the developer tools, but it's not complicated to use. There's also a few softwares which enable to do that, like Browser Stack. So this is the most important part. It's a social topic. It's an environmental topic. This best practice might be one of the most important. If your service runs on an old, narrow smartphone with low bandwidth, then it's going to be respectful of a lot of eco-design practices. So this is a top priority topic and a top priority best practice. If you aim at being able to run on this kind of context and devices, then it's going to be good on many other topics. Another thing when we work with other people is most of the times you work in agile frameworks, which is good. It's compatible if it's done properly. Agile is not always well applied, sadly. But if it is, it's nice. It has a lot of similarities, such as continuous improvement, iterative approaches, development by value, and multidisciplinarity in the team. However, I tend to see a lot of companies in which agile is not well applied. By that, I mean that the team should be autonomous in agile framework. So the team should choose the length of the sprint. And I see many companies where the length of the sprint is imposed and what's in it as well. And it has two consequences. First, it doesn't give enough time to the team for reviewing, assessments, self-audit, experimentation, documentation, and skill improvement, which are all necessary to be better at eco-design and to do it well. And second, it has oftentimes an incentive to launch new features on a regular basis. So to add all the time instead of improving and caring, or to reach the lowest time to market possible instead of putting quality first. So it's not because of agility, it's because of the way agility is sometimes really badly applied as a top-down management framework and not as an autonomous mentality and mindset. So to prevent that, it's good to implement goals and safeguards so that agility is a friend and not a foe to eco-design. And to finish on that, it can be by setting some OKRs or indicators, or changing your definition of done or definition of ready. There's a lot of way to make sure agility is really going to help eco-designing. If you want to go further on this topic, you can check out the APIscene, so the framework I was mentioning, the French one. It's available in English, fully translated on this website by the French agency. It's a PDF. And then you can also check for the worldwide web standard, which is made by the W3C. It's also something collaborative. You can help improving all the time these guidelines by joining the work group on it. And for the French-speaking people, we also have a lot of resources on our website. They are all free and under Creative Commons license. Our website is currently being translated, so it should be fully available in English by March 2025. It includes guidelines on eco-design, systemic design, written on experiences, and all kinds of ideas to implement eco-design approaches in your company. So to close on this topic, eventually you saw eco-design is not something extremely complicated. Probably you're doing a lot of those best practices already. Eventually, it's just about first being frugal. Don't do more than you need. Don't add features which are not extremely necessary. So just be frugal. Don't develop a service if it's not needed. Then it's good UX. Make sure to focus on your user needs and not the company needs. Make sure that the experience is really seamless and smooth, and that the user spend as less time possible on the service. And finally, you can optimize what you add and what you do with your developers and as a designer as well, to make sure that it's always accessible and eco-designed. And do it in this order. Don't do it the other way around. If you start with optimizing, it's okay as a first step, but don't stop there. Many companies just optimize a bit and say that they eco-design the website. That's not how it works. You should really start the other way around. So thank you very much for listening to this talk. Don't hesitate to reach out on LinkedIn or on our website, Designer Ethiques. And thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye.